Our next guest knows training inside out. As a director of a very successful Lancashire-based training provider, delivering accredited training to over 30,000 delegates a year, working with some of the UK's most, major construction companies, he brings a wealth of knowledge to Everest and will be taking us through all about how to get the most impact from your training. Welcome to Everest, Matt Bewley.
Thanks, Louis. Just it's still not allowing me to show my video, but I'll share my screen and then hopefully everyone can see that. Does that come up okay?
Yeah, that's fine, Matt. I will figure out what's going on with the video.
No problem. Well, I'll make a start. Hello everyone. And well, thank you to AP or Access Planet for this opportunity, and obviously for everyone out there joining us for this session. My talk today and discussion is all about learning impact and how we, the benefits of learning impact, why measuring learning impact is important, and why it's been important to 3B and certainly our growth over sort of the last 10 years or so. So the things that I'd like to discuss is looking at what is learning impact, then discussing the benefits and measuring learning impact. And then, as an organization, we've developed 6 steps to success, which I'd like to share with you today. And then a couple of examples of where, when we've applied that to training and a learning and development program, it's had a positive impact. But also when those 6 steps weren't applied to training, the negative impact that had as well. And I'd like to discuss both those because they're sort of experiences I've had with customers that we've dealt with. And then hopefully, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for any questions sort of out there. So for me, learning and learning impact, I think it's important that we look at, a couple of definitions. And I think particularly learning in particular. And there's a couple of things that I found, particularly when I was looking for definitions around learning. The first one, it was all around the acquisition of knowledge or skills, essentially through study or being taught something. So, in a training world, essentially attending a course and having something being delivered to you. So very much a trainer, tutor, teacher, delegate, pupil sort of experience. The other definition that I've come across is something that is learned via an experience. You often hear the saying, I've been taught a lesson today, and you often refer to that by something that you've experienced. So when you put those two together, essentially learning is the process or getting an understanding of something by either studying it or by experience. Impact, though, there's a few definitions, but the couple that I came across was marked effect or influence. It was just quite simple. But the one that I really liked was a powerful effect that something, especially something new, has on a situation as a person. And I think when you look at those two definitions and you talk about learning impact and then actually wanting to measure learning impact, it's important that you understand what it is that you want to, whether it's employees, whether it's delegates, that the lesson or the experience that you want to give them. And then you can sort of really understand and measure the impact of what that is likely to have back in somebody's workplace. So when you put those together, I think it's really important we understand when we talk about learning impact. And it's really important that when we move through this, it's the delegates or whoever the cohort are that are on part of the journey with you, when you're delivering a course, really understand that as well. So So just to look at that in a work context, essentially, you often, if you're a business and you're working with an external training provider like 3B or any training provider out there, or whether you're working with an internal department, so a learning and development department or a training department, you'll often find that there are various initiatives that you might offer for sort of opportunities and training and development. So I thought this definition worked very well. So various learning and development initiatives that affects a measurable change in an individual and or an organisation. And I think that sums up learning impact perfectly and what you would look to measure. The one thing, though, that I would like to sort of point out at this point, though, it might not be possible to fully attribute the impact that you're looking for to the learning alone. And that is something that I do want to explore, as we go through today. So there's a quick poll, and I'd like to ask, and I think Louis is going to bring something up on screen. So it's a dead simple question, and I'd just like to understand, how many of you actually measure learning impact within your business at the moment? I'll give you a few seconds to do that, as that adds up. So a couple of you said it's not applicable. So far, more are saying yes, but a couple of no's are creeping in. So I think, we're about halfway through the people on the actual call at the moment. So at the moment, 50% are saying yes, they measure. Around 30% are saying no, and then 20% are saying not applicable, which is interesting. And I think often, at some point, every business will offer some sort of training or development for their employees. And, it's good to see that at least half of you are measuring in it in some capacity. Now, there has been some industry, so I'll just end that poll. I'll share that with everybody so you can see that. But there has been some industry research into this. And, I would like to sort of discuss that a little bit further as well. So if I move on to the next slide, get rid of that. So CIPD, which are obviously a big player in the learning and development sort of arena, did some different assessments and did different polls. And they actually found that most businesses, only 16% assess the behaviour change of participants by assessing the transfer of learning into the workplace. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that, and the reasons why that is considerably lower than what has come through on the poll today. And I was expecting roughly from the poll about half and half. So we've got slightly less than that, but then, 20% did say it was not applicable to your workplace. The reason, though, that when they looked at behaviour change, what they found was they felt it was quite difficult and often complex to try and actually essentially get that behaviour mapped to a particular measurable. But what they found was it was because that when they were looking at assessing and measuring learning impact, they hadn't considered it at design stage. So the good news to that is, one, it definitely can be done, and it's great to see that a number of you are doing that already. I think for the rest that either weren't or found it not applicable, I've got some ideas of other areas that you can look at within the business that you were already probably measuring, but because you've not necessarily linked it back to the design stage of a learning and development program, you've probably not necessarily thought then to pick that up. But when you measure learning impact, there's lots of things that you can look at. And for me, I'll just move the slide along. there's a number of reasons why it's important to do it, but I think there's three key reasons, and number one for me far outweighs the other two, but and that is down to your employees, or the employees that you might be training on behalf of another organization. And according to a poll done recently, so by LinkedIn, they found that 95% of employees are more likely to stay with a company longer if they feel their skills are being developed on the job. So if you think about that, being able to then measure that and show that back to the employees so they can see that they're developing is really important, and really important feedback for them. So for me, when you consider the world that we're in now, it's very difficult to recruit, it's very competitive. You know, a lot of people, you know, but typically with what's going on, don't necessarily want to change. Retention of employees is probably one of the number one priorities in a lot of companies' minds right now. So I think learning, delivering training, and actually measuring that learning impact is something that you really want to be thinking about if you're not doing already. The other two are important, but one of them for me is it's more about linking your business goals and, you know, developing those and the business opportunities to the training and the development that you do. So whether that again is working with an internal department or external, linking that learning program or that training that you're going to offer back to the business goals and KPIs that have been set out is really important, and can really show the stakeholders, you know, that what you're doing from a learning and development point of view is a real positive. The third party that I believe it's really important to understand learning impact and the benefits and how that has worked is actually the training department themselves. And again, I don't think it matters whether you're an external party like 3B, where we go into lots of businesses, or whether you're an internal training or department. Understanding that what you've delivered 3, 6 or 12 months after it's been delivered has had the desired impact. One, it gives you confidence that you're doing something right and it's going in the right direction. But secondly, if for whatever reason you haven't quite hit the mark or the goals that you initially set out, you can tweak and change that and then develop a better program for the future. And I think that's really important. So the benefits then of measuring learning impact, okay, I think speak for themselves, you know, and we've obviously had a slide in the poll from LinkedIn about developing the learner and the importance to employees, but also helps them track their progress within an organization. And employees now, particularly, you know, younger people coming into work, they value progression, opportunity and development far more than money. And the belief behind that is if they're developing and they're growing as individuals, the money comes anyway with opportunity and progression. So I think it really helps us to be able to track learners and their progress. Like I said, you know, from a client's point of view, we can link goals and successes directly back to learning impact. We should see an increased return on investment. So whatever we put into that, we should see a return on investment. Learning impact can demonstrate results. It can reduce things like incidents, and it can improve compliance. It will improve performance overall, and it can reduce risk, you know, and I'm not just talking about health and safety based risk, but it could be risk of losing employees as an example. And some of the things that I want to talk about then in terms of measuring these things, you know, if you go back to your business and your own businesses, or some of the businesses that you might have worked with, if you think about their KPIs, you know, how they might measure performance through appraisals and one-to-ones, pretty much every business I've worked with and known measures revenue and margin. They will measure things like sickness. And if you think about particularly organizations that are output based, so a manufacturing organization, they will measure things like output. So I've got another poll for you. So based on the things that I've just mentioned, I think Louis is going to bring that up now. I'd like to know how many of you, I think it's a tick box, actually measure at least one of the things or multiple of the things that I've just suggested. So if you could start, I believe it's a tick box, or you can click yes, that we measure that. Then we'll get to see how many of you actually measure different, that your business is already measuring. So a couple of you have mentioned learning impact results, reducing risk, improving performance. One of you's mentioned none of these. Maybe you do something else, possibly developing the learner, tracking progress, linking to organizational goals and success. So, a number of you are saying that you're doing most of these, which is really good to see. So I think when you go back to measuring learning impact, going back to the original poll where you said that only 50% of you essentially measure learning impact, that actually isn't true. It's what and the complex bit is linking it back to existing measures already within the business. And I think that's something that, whether you're working with an external organization or an internal learning and development team, looking at that and linking it back to something that is already existing is far easier than having to come up with a brand new measurement altogether. I'll end that poll now. I'll share those results so you can start seeing those. And I just think, for me, when you come to looking at learning impact, often the best scenario is the simplest. And looking at what it is, the impact that you want to have, and then linking that back to existing measures that are already aligned with your business, will always have a big impact. It's also then much easier for you to be able to demonstrate to the wider business that what you're doing as a learning and development team, or the training that you've embarked on, is having the desired impact that you want. There is one area, though, that I do want to have a look at and discuss. And I think, for me, it's important to link consequence in terms of learning impact. And for me, consequence is a key driver if you're looking to change someone's behaviour. Now, we all know what that sign means. It's a 60-mile-an-hour sign. But I think if we all honestly ask ourselves, for those of us that drive, if we're in a 60-mile-an-hour zone, there will be at times, and not all the time, but there'll be times where we have broken that speed limit. And I'm quite happy to admit, hopefully there's no police on this call, but I'm quite happy to admit at times I've broken the 60-mile-an-hour zone, and I've probably ignored that sign. But when you link that to the 60-mile sign, to this speed camera sign, all of a sudden you pay more attention to the first sign, because you know what the consequence is if you get caught, and you're more likely then to comply to that initial signage. And I think that's something that we often forget to apply when we're talking about learning impact and delivering training. Now, this example I've given is something, it's actually a negative consequence. And I think, sometimes that has to be in place. And I think if you're delivering something as a business, and it's to enforce some sort of change, it might be that you have to have some sort of negative or consequence that has a negative attached to it. But that's not always the case. And I'll go back to things, and a couple of you measure output. But if you're delivering a learning and development program, and it's focused on improving efficiency and output, and you then you deliver that training, and then if people see and the business sees an increased output, you could link that then quite easily to something positive for the business and potentially even the individuals as well. So just because we're talking about a consequence, I think sometimes we're a bit programmed to go to a negative point of view as opposed to a positive. But I think that's something that we can consider and look at and need considering quite early on when we're designing training and learning and development. So for me, that gives, you know, a short whistle-top story about learning impact and the benefits of measuring learning impact and what that can do for the organisation. Now, I'd want to just talk through the 6 steps to success that, you know, we certainly use at 3B wherever possible. And the first step is very much about when you first get an inquiry, and we have, I know we've got a couple of raised hands. So what I will do, there's a few questions, but what I'll do, I'll come to all those right at the end, because some of the examples that I've got actually will highlight some of, you know, the question there about the biggest benefit from measuring learning impact. So in terms of the steps to success, for me, the first step is all about that initial inquiry, and it's often with key stakeholders or someone who is looking to book that training, and sometimes it's more about the business needs. At this step, you want to try and clarify what it is and why the training is needed, what impact that the business is looking for, and what outcomes are they hoping to see. I would expect, whether this is an external training provider or an internal training department, to want to understand what are the key statistics, what the goals are for improvement, and what are the key measurements that you're looking to achieve as part of that. And once you've got that, you can then look at step 2, which is all about the individuals and the delegates that are going to receive the training. And I think it's really important to try and, at an early stage, to be engaged with them before you've actually delivered any training. You can then work with that. It might be a snapshot of if it's a big cohort that you're going to deliver into, it might be just 1 or 2, or it might be a group to begin with, but it'd be clarifying learning goals of the delegates. I think by meeting the delegates at an early stage, it also helps you to align the content that they're going to need and where they are as individuals. It will help you decide the types of delivery methods and the best ways that they're likely to take this level of learning and being able to apply it. And it will help then, as a tutor, come up with ways to engage with the learners. I think, though, the other side of that, and that's very much coming from a learning and development point of view, but in terms of the learners, I think it also helps them feel they're being involved in this training. And 9 times out of 10, if you do that, the engagement later in the actual delivery of training is far better than it is if it's just a case of, we need this course, these are the learners, and we've seen it where we have delegates turning up to our courses and they don't know why they're there. That eliminates this, and I think it's a really important step. The third step then, so before we've even decided to design a course, this step is all about design. But by now we've had a good conversation with delegates, we've had a conversation with client, and then we can start to put some things down on paper and discuss things like presentations, handouts, how we're going to deliver it. Is it all theory? Is it theory practical? Are we going to do things face to face? Is it going to be e-learning parts of it? Is it going to be online as in Teams or Zoom and things like that? Now, the one thing I want to sort of mention here, there'll be times where you may need to miss out a chunk of the design process. Typically in 3B's world, and we deliver a lot of health and safety based training, often the design of a course is taken out of our hands. But it doesn't necessarily mean you can't have the discussion with the delegates to understand how you're going to get that information across. So often the design process comes in when you're actually looking to develop something bespoke. But the things that you still could include at this point are company processes, company history, if it's to a cohort all from the same company, as an example. Particularly if you're looking to change something that has been sort of instilled in a business for a long time, you'll want to understand that history and why that exists, and then line it to things like different legislation to make sure it's appropriate. And 100%, the driving force behind this part of the process will be the tutor, who's likely to deliver the vast majority of the program. The fourth step then is training delivery itself. So in an ideal world, you would look to roll out some sort of pilot. Now, if you've got a huge cohort or multiple courses, you might actually be able to deliver a full course. But it might be that you can't do that, and what you just need to do is take a snapshot, of the handouts and the presentation, just to be able to review those with a couple of people to receive 360-degree feedback. This is really important, because the last thing that you want to do is be 2/3 of the way through a training program and then actually find the feedback that you're getting, and you need to start making lots of tweaks and changes, at a later stage, when half your delegates then, or even more than half, aren't going to receive that. And I think giving your delegates and your client a real opportunity to critique what you've done is brave, but I think it's necessary to make sure that actually the delivery process works really, really well. Fifth step is all about the course feedback, and this isn't necessarily just about the tutor or teacher to delegate feedback. I like to discuss and really encourage what we call a feedback loop with our clients. And the example that I'd like to sort of give here, when you think about feedback, particularly if you are used to delivering training, or you're a business that's delivering training, or even if you're working in the learning and development department that has organised some training for your business, you often hear the term after delivering some training, well, no news is good news. But I think you've really got to ask yourself, is it? And I am always very nervous when, I hear that sort of terminology. And the reason being, I'll just take us out of the learning and development world for 1 second. And I just want you to all, and you've all been there, and I'm sure, I certainly have done this. You're in a restaurant, and the waiter or the waitress comes over and asks, is everything okay? And the meal might have been fine, might have been no problems, and you'll say yes, it's lovely, but knowing that something could have been better. But rather than saying that, you often just say, yeah, no, it's fine, thank you very much. The only time that you really make a complaint is if it's really bad. But to prove my point, of feedback loop works, and where you need that sort of third person is, it's often at that time where you will ask to speak to a manager and you will get them involved, rather than complaining to the person that has either served you. I think most people, not everybody, but most people feel more comfortable being able to complain to somebody else or give some constructive feedback to someone else to pass it on. There is a couple of dangers with that, because they might not pass on the exact message. But when you have that flow of information, particularly for a training provider, that is key to getting this right, because what you will do, and I've experienced this, the first course that you deliver to the 10th course you deliver will be slightly different. And it'll be different because what you do, you base your feedback and the knowledge and the experience you get from each course to improve your next one. And I think that's really important. So I think explaining a feedback loop to your client at an early stage and why it's important, it means everybody's expecting it, but it also means that people are much more comfortable giving constructive criticism and giving you that feedback. And the last step is the impact review. So this is the bit where we come to measure and go back to those first, particularly that first step and that second step, making sure this gets included in the design phase. So when we're delivering training, we're talking about this and that impact review. What you need to consider is after you've delivered the training, you might need to do this on several occasions, because realistically, you might not see an instant impact only a week after you've delivered any training. So it's really important that you will set out the right timeframes at an early stage of when this is going to happen. And I think it's really important, even after you've finished as a training provider or a department, that you've delivered that training, that it's agreed who's going to do this and what's going to happen with that review. Because if you're going to then deliver this again, whether it's to a different business or you're going to do refresher training in a couple of years, you really need to understand, have you met your goals and your KPIs that you set out to achieve in the first place? And has it had the desired impact that you want? Because if it hasn't, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it means that you can change and develop what you're doing to improve again. And I think that continual review and feedback is important. And the things that you're going to want to look at: has behavior changed? What did the statistics look like before and then after the training? And at what points, if you're going to measure something after 3 months, 6 months and 9 points, have you seen a steady increase? How much is that down to the learning, and how much is that down to the learning and then the experience someone's been able to get after being able to apply that new set of skills to their workplace? And I think that's a really important part when you then taking it forward to develop maybe new cohorts to new people coming through a business. So them are our 6 steps that we use. They're not all necessarily developed within 3B. These are things that we've taken from other organizations, but have been developed over a long period of time. But I wanted to share 2 things. I wanted to share basically what happened when we were allowed to use those 6 steps with a client of ours, and then when we weren't. So we had 2 clients, different. It didn't happen at the same time, but we had 2 customers that approached us with an issue. And the issue was they had staff that were not wearing the correct respiratory protective equipment. So essentially a face mask that is going to protect the wearer from breathing in a harmful substance. So we put a proposal to both customers, and it was basically to work through those 6 steps, to work with them, work with the senior managers and employees to understand the learning goals, what the business needed to do and change to make sure that these employees, ultimately the learners that we were going to be engaging with, then wore the masks. We then wanted to run a pilot, which essentially took a small group of employees, gave them different types of masks to go and try out within the workplace, check which ones they thought were fitted best, which ones worked best, and then through that did a number of testing with them to see which ones fitted most appropriately to the workforce. And then what we would do after that is come together, select the mask that they wanted to go for with, and then basically roll that out to the wider business. So the first client decided not to take us on this approach. Now, the part of this that most of our customers needed is just the test at the end. That's the bit that is what they're looking for. But client A decided that they basically just wanted to do the test. And as a result, sometime after, they were basically issued an improvement notice for the HSE, which essentially means that certain activities on site they couldn't do until they sorted this out. Basically, what happened then is they had to go back to the drawing boards. They had a number of activities on site that they had to stop whilst we went through all this process, and then had to basically deliver this out for them. And it was obviously very time precious for them, because obviously they were building on behalf of a customer of theirs, and this obviously created them a number of issues. It cost them more money, but ultimately took them a lot longer to deal with this in the first place. The second client, though, client B, decided to take us up on the full solution. We delivered basically stages 1 right the way through, the design process and the pilot within just over a week. We'd made that decision then of which mass to go and then how to deliver the rest of the training. And then pretty much by the end of, the 4th week, by the end of the month, the training was done. And they've had no issues with employees. And generally the employees, when we went out to site, felt engaged and understood why we were there and why we were doing some training on the mass and the importance of it. And as a result, I've had no issues. So from my point of view, every time we get an opportunity to apply the 6 steps, I can more or less guarantee our customer success when it comes to learning and development and being able to measure positive impact. And that's why we try to approach every certainly bespoke training course that way, because I think the client gets a much better service from 3B. But I also appreciate, at the end of the day, it is really down to the client to decide which route they want to go down. So I think we've got a little bit of time, Louis, I believe, for questions. And I know there's a few in the chat. Do you want me to just go into the chat and dig some out? And
well, if it's easier, Matt, I'll shoot them straight at you. Hopefully your video should be, I did try messaging you through, but I know you were trying to share screens and stuff. So hopefully it will let your video share now.
With what I will do then, I'll stop sharing. Not sure if it's... And yeah, here we go. There you go. I've appeared. So you at least all know.
Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Bewley. So yeah, I'll fire them at you if you want, and then I'll let you shoot from the hip with the answers. So one from Ian to kick us off. Can surveys or assessments be used to measure learning impact, or is this more relevant for learning retention?
Look, Ian, I think that's a great question. In answer to what you said, I think surveys are a great way of doing this, particularly if you work in a large organization or you're working with a customer that has a lot of employees. And I think, for me, the great thing about a survey is you can do a survey before you deliver any sort of training or learning and development program. So that will help. So if you're looking to measure something, you're not sure what the statistics are, take a survey, and find out what they are. What you can do then is use the same survey a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, then after the training has been delivered. And I think if you then match that in with toolbox talks, little workshops to make sure that people, if they've been on a course and as an organization you've invested time and money into that individual, that they know how to apply that learning into the workplace. So I think a survey is very good. The beauty about it is it will quickly show you whether the learning is having the impact or not, and whether you need to do something about it. If you see it going up steadily each time you did that survey, you're on the right track. If it's dropping or starts to sort of plateau out, you might then need to have a look at some refresher training, a few workshops, just to re-engage the employees that you've delivered that training to.
Perfect. So Access Planet helps with automating them, so you don't forget to send them out in 3 or 6 months, right?
Absolutely. And that's something I can vouch for, and we use that exact system to be able to do that. I can vouch for that, and it works really, really well.
Sometimes I can't resist. Where there's an opportunity for a plug, forgive me, everyone. Sorry, Matt. On to the next question. Right. What's the biggest benefit you've seen from measuring learning impact, particularly in 3B?
Okay, that's a difficult question, because I think it partly pulls my opinion into this, and partly what I'm personally passionate about as well. So 3B very much offer health and safety based training. A lot of what we offer is mandatory, but most of it focuses on the safety side rather than the health Now, the bit that I'm passionate about, and particularly we work a lot within the construction sector, they take health and safety very seriously, but the safety just seems easier to manage rather than the health side of it. And going back to my two examples that I delivered in terms of the client, the fact that once we sat down to explain the health benefits to one of our customers, and ultimately what we're doing is stopping people breathing in hazardous substances, which causes, ultimately lung cancer. And the stats on some of these issues, particularly within the construction industry, is staggering. So for me, being able to see a direct impact on a business who had a real problem with people with beards, stubble, just not wanting to wear RPE. We're talking a business that employed well over 1,000 people, then to be able to actually get recommendations from the HSE and actually have a real turn in their business. So now you go onto a lot of their sites and see them. Actually, what we've seen is people wearing masks, wearing them correctly. When they're starting an activity, if they've not got a mask on, go and getting the mask and putting it on properly. And the fact that we delivered that initial training 3 years ago, and we're just embarking now on some refresher training just to make sure that they're keeping up to it. I think that for me has been, because I know in 30 to 40 years time, that could be the difference between someone having lung cancer and not. So I think it's a personal one, but when you measure it that way, that's really important. And I think that's why we should be measuring learning impact, in my opinion.
Yeah, it doesn't get much bigger. When the question was, what's the biggest benefit you've seen? I mean, life or death? It's pretty big. I'd agree with that one, Matt.
And in 3B's world, it often is because of the sector we work in and the training that we do. So, and that's why we're so passionate about it. So,
I'd say it's amazing. Next question. Do you demonstrate learning impact to your customers, and how? Example, if you provided training to a construction business, do you help them to decide on those learning impact measures?
Yeah, 100%, and I think we can then take our previous experience over the last sort of 12 to 15 years of what we've done for different courses and the impacts that we would see. Ian, in answer to your question, it would also need you to help share where you are from a business point of view and statistics, if that was something you were happy to do. And then we could then work with an organization to set goals. So, for instance, if we're delivering a management health and safety course, the impact of that is going to be very different to delivering something around dust management. So it will be tailored to the courses that are needed, but we would 100% sit down. And often what we do when we're talking about that, we often involve the SHEC team, so the health and safety and quality teams, to have a look at that, look at what statistics you've got. One of the other things that we do as well, is look at where a lot of companies have either near misses or increases in certain types of sickness. So we've worked with an organisation who have a lot of repetitive strain injuries, and we've looked at the reasons why they get that and why employees have those injuries, develop some training, and then that will get measured actually over a long period of time, over probably a number of months and possibly even years. And what they're looking for then is a reduction in obviously that sick pattern. So we would definitely sit down with companies to do that, no problem at all.
Awesome. And then last one that I've got, anyone who's got any more, feel free to drop them in the chat. But how do you encourage or engage your clients to provide feedback? Do you have any tips on this?
For me, often feedback gets talked about at the end of the course. And for me, it's probably the most important part of the course, and agreeing how you're going to get that feedback, and I think training providers are a little bit guilty of, we'll go in, we'll deliver a course, and then the tutor's got a stack of blank forms on the desk or if we're online now, it's an online form, and it only gets talked about once the delivery has been, and that part of the training has been complete. For me, feedback is the key to improvement. So I think if we talk about it at the start, and we talk about it at the design process and how we're going to collect that feedback and how it's going to be done, you have then a much more collective way of getting it, and delegates then expect to give feedback. And I think it's the tip for me then, don't leave it to the end. I know you can only give the feedback at the end of the course, but start the discussion much earlier, and agree how you're going to get that feedback. Is it going to be a form handed by the tutor out at the end of the course? Is it going to be anonymous? Is it going to be done through a Trustpilot type scale? Anything like that, but agree your method you're going to do, and then explain that as part of the design process and get that mapped into when you're delivering the course.
Lovely. Right. Sounds, I think, ticked a lot of the boxes there, Matt. And then there is one more. How to cope with GDPR when measuring long-term impact. And then it's, i.e., we get permission to contact the client for the duration of the training, but communication further down the line is not given.
Look, that is difficult, and I think, again, this is something that for me, it's a hurdle that you're going to come across. For me, though, you're not necessarily asking for any personal information, when you're asking for this information. And I think it was Ian's question about surveys when doing this is really important. And actually then you can keep it very anonymous, and people, you're not then sharing people's names or personal details. It might be that it's agreed that the organization, at the start of the training, and it might be for instance, the way we tend to do it, if we're measuring something over a long period of time, it might be a platform that we use, that we give delegates access to, but they can do it anonymously. So what happens then is we get that and then share that back to the customer. So if you've delivered something 12 months ago, you want to then see the impact of that, let's say now, you're not asking for anything that, for me, should really get, any issues from a GDPR point of view. But again, that's a discussion that you need to have at the start before, and get that agreed of how that's going to look. So I hope that answers the question, and but that is probably how I would deal with that sort of situation.
I think it does for me anyway. Hopefully it does for you as well, guys. Matt, that's the end of the questions, I think. So huge thank you again for that talk. I know I've certainly got a list of takeaways as long as my arm, and I'm sure everyone watching will have too. Such a useful session, and yeah, plenty of actionable points as well. So thank you again for being part of Everest, Matt. We'll take a final break, and then we'll be back maybe just after 3:15 before we introduce our final talk of Everest 2022. And we'll hear from award-winning speaker and business leader Diana L. Howells. So please don't go anywhere. We'll see you.
Thanks a lot, all. Cheers. Thanks, Louis. Bye-bye.